It was a horrifying sight. After being trapped together in a pitch-black dungeon for over a week and a half, starving, neglected, and losing their sanity, what rescuers found when they opened the door shocked the entire medieval world. Inside were the remains of Matilda de Briouze and her son William, victims of one of the most gruesome orders ever, issued by King John. The brutal act left such an impression that it helped inspire a clause in the famous Magna Carta. This is the chilling story of the woman who ate her own son. Be warned, though there are no disturbing visuals, this account includes a vivid description of their remains from a primary historical source and is not for the faint of heart. Our story unfolds during the reign of King John, who ruled England between 1199 and 1216. John was becoming deeply unpopular, with whispers, most likely true, that he had murdered his nephew, Arthur of Brittany, in 1203 to secure the throne. The young prince vanished that same year and his fate was never officially confirmed, but one of John's attendants, William de Briouze, who had once delivered Arthur to his uncle, claimed that the king killed the boy himself, striking him with a rock at Rouen before throwing his body into the river Seine. The corpse was later retrieved and buried at the priory of Sainte-Marie-des-Prés. Remember this tale. It becomes crucial later. William de Briouze, whose name I admit challenges my French pronunciation, was a powerful nobleman with vast lands in England, Wales, and Ireland. He had supported John's rise to power after the death of Richard the Lionheart, and the numerous royal charters bearing William's signature show how close they were. In those early years, William was a royal favorite, steadily gathering lands, wealth, and influence. But with his fortune came enormous debts to the crown, and those debts would eventually destroy both him and his family. William's wife, Matilda de St. Valery, was the daughter of Bernard, Lord of Beckley in Oxfordshire. Together they had 9 surviving children, including 4 sons, the eldest also named William. By 1208, tension between King John and William had begun to boil over. William had become extremely wealthy and influential, and more dangerously, he knew too much about the king's rumored murder of Arthur of Brittany. On top of that, he owed the crown an enormous sum and had fallen behind on payments. John decided to strike back. He demanded the full repayment of debts and ordered the de Briouze family to hand over their sons as hostages to ensure their good behavior. At the same time, John was trying to reassert control over his nobles. The Pope had placed England under interdict, suspending baptisms, marriages, and burials, a huge blow to royal authority. Hostages were John's way of keeping his barons in check. But when his messengers reached the de Briouze estate to collect the boys, Matilda, often called Maud in records, flatly refused. Her eldest son couldn't be given up anyway. He was already being held hostage by his brother-in-law, Walter de Lacy, and then she said something that would seal her family's fate. According to the English monk Roger of Wendover, Matilda, wife of the said William with the sauciness of a woman, took the reply out of his mouth and said to the messengers in reply, "I will not deliver up my sons to your lord King John," because he basely murdered his nephew, Arthur, whom he ought to have taken care of honorably. That bold statement hinted that Matilda knew something about Arthur's death, perhaps from her husband himself. But even if she didn't, everyone already suspected King John of the murder. Her words, however, were enough to ignite his fury. Roger tells us that William tried to calm the situation and smooth things over, saying her husband, on hearing her speech, rebuked her and said, "Thou hast spoken like a foolish woman against our lord the king, for if I have offended him in anything, I am and shall be ready to give satisfaction to my lord, and that without hostages, according to the decision of his court and of my fellow barons, if he will fix on a time and place for my so doing." But the damage was done. When the messengers reported her defiance to the king, John's anger exploded. He secretly sent knights to arrest William and his family. Warned by friends, they fled to Ireland, taking their children and relatives with them. It's an incredible story. But how reliable was Roger of Wendover? Though he lived in the same era, he was known for blending truth with dramatic fiction, sometimes shaping events into moral lessons rather than strict history. He even claimed that King John demanded hostages from other families too, an assertion unsupported by other records. His writings often borrowed from now-lost chronicles rather than eyewitness accounts. For historians, that makes his work both frustrating and valuable. Unreliable in parts, yet possibly preserving stories that would have vanished otherwise. So, while Roger's dramatic dialogue may not be literal, John's later cruelty toward Matilda suggests there was real hatred between them, perhaps lending some truth to Wendover's tale. Other sources paint Matilda as a strong and disciplined woman, not someone prone to reckless words. The monk Gerald of Wales, who lived from about 1146 to the early 1220s, described her as a prudent and chaste woman, a woman placed with propriety at the head of her house, equally attentive to the economical disposal of her property within doors, as to the augmentation of it without. Gerald came from an aristocratic family with deep ties in Wales, England, and Ireland. He likely knew William and maybe Matilda too through court circles. His respect for her could have been genuine, or influenced by his later dislike of King John. Whatever the full truth, multiple records confirm that the de Briouze family's relationship with the king collapsed. Facing royal wrath, they escaped to Ireland around early 1209. As historian Dan Jones notes, John retaliated by seizing their lands, stripping titles, and punishing their allies. Officially, he claimed to act according to the custom of England and the law of the Exchequer, but no one believed that excuse. Roger continues the story, correctly noting that King John crossed the Irish Sea in pursuit. Though he doesn't specify the exact date, we know the invasion took place in the summer of 1210, costing 6,180 in ships and soldiers, over 10 million in modern value. Eventually, John captured Matilda, her son William Jr., likely already in Ireland under Walter de Lacy's care, and William's wife at a fortress in Meath. Despite earlier mentions that William Sr. had fled with them, he disappears from this part of the tale. The king now had 3 of the de Briouze family in his grasp, and their nightmare had only just begun. The king then sent them, quote, loaded with chains into England and ordered them to be closely confined in Windsor Castle. Later, Roger recorded that the noblewoman Matilda, wife of William de Briouze, and her son and heir William with his wife, who had been imprisoned at Windsor by order of the English king, died of starvation at that place. But this is only one version of what happened. How does it compare to other accounts? The Annals of Margam offer more detail, stating, while the king was staying in Ireland with his army, Hugh de Lacy, Earl of Ulster, was put to flight, and William de Briouze the younger was captured, together with his wife, several of his sons, and his mother Matilda de Saint Valery. They were first kept under the strictest guard and taken by sea to Bristol, and afterwards led to Windsor Castle, a ransom of 50,000 marks having been imposed. William the Elder was allowed to go free as if to raise the money, but he then fled to France. When this was discovered, the king immediately caused his wife and son to be starved to death in prison, and he drove Walter de Lacy, his son-in-law, into exile, and confiscated all the possessions of the aforementioned nobles, which were many in England, in Wales, and in Ireland. This version reveals how William Sr. managed to reach France while his wife and heir were left behind. It also confirms that William Jr.'s family was captured, and that Windsor Castle was indeed their place of death, starvation being the method. The ransom of 50,000 marks was impossibly high, so unrealistic that it may have been meant as punishment rather than payment. In today's value, that would be around 86.3 million, far beyond the reach of a family already stripped of income and lands. Now, let's turn to the most disturbing account, the one that suggests cannibalism. It appears in the History of the Dukes of Normandy and the Kings of England, written by a French courtier known only as Anonymous of Bethune around the early 1220s. He wrote, Matilda of Briouz and William her husband, when they heard the news that the king was coming against them, did not dare wait but instead fled from the land. William of Briouz went off to France but was taken through a safe conduct, and Matilda, his wife, and William, their son, fled to Ireland to Hugh de Lacy, who was William's relative from Briouz. The king seized their land. Then he entered the sea and passed into Ireland, and came to the city of Dublin, where he was received with great joy. A little later, he added, King John then besieged the castle of Carrickfergus, which was very strong. This is entirely true. He did besiege the castle in 1210. Hugh de Lacy and Matilda de Briouze and William, her son, had been inside it. But when they heard talk of the king's coming, they did not dare to wait, but entered the sea and fled to the Isle of Man, where they stayed for 4 days. Then they passed over into the land of Galloway in Scotland. There, Matilda de Briouze and her son William were captured. They were then sent back to Ireland to King John, who was Lord, and who was still before the castle of Carrickfergus. Immediately, we notice key differences. William Sr. appears to have gone to France earlier, perhaps without ever reaching Ireland. This matches other records showing that he met John in Wales before the king sailed for Ireland. The timeline of their separation and capture is confusing, varying from source to source. There's also no mention here of William Jr.'s wife being imprisoned, and it remains unclear whether William Jr. went to Ireland voluntarily or as Walter de Lacy's hostage. Another detail: instead of being captured in Ireland, Matilda and her son supposedly fled to the Isle of Man, then to Scotland, where they were seized and returned across the Irish Sea. It sounds excessive for the 13th century, but it's actually plausible. Carrickfergus, located in County Antrim, sits right by Belfast Lough, close enough to see Scotland's coast on a clear day. I've seen it myself. You can even spot the wind turbines across the water, so their transport back to Ireland would have been entirely possible. For the record, Carrickfergus Castle still stands today, remarkably preserved and well worth a visit for anyone traveling through Northern Ireland. The Anonymous of Bethune continues. King John then captured the castle of Carrickfergus, placed the bailiffs in charge of the land, and afterwards returned to England. When he arrived in England, he imprisoned Matilda de Briouze and her son William in Corfe Castle, placing with them a sheaf of oats and a piece of raw bacon. No other food was given to them. This time, the location shifts from Windsor to Corfe Castle in Dorset. We're told that the prisoners were given only oats and raw bacon, barely a mockery of sustenance. The chronicler adds, on the 11th day the mother was found dead, sitting upright between the legs of her son, completely emaciated, except that her head had fallen back upon her son's breast as if she were dead in his arms. The son, though dead, still remained perfectly upright, except that his head leaned backward against the wall like a dead man, and the mother, out of distress, had eaten all his cheeks away. When William de Briouze, who was in Paris, learned this news, he soon died thereafter. Other sources say he expired on 9th August 1211, and many testified that it was from grief. The Bishop of Hereford, his son, buried him, to whom the king later restored their father's lands. No other account describes the deaths in such horrific detail, or claims that Matilda consumed her son's flesh to survive. But given that William Sr. was in Paris and the writer served the French court, it's possible the story came directly from those close to him, perhaps even eyewitnesses of what the king's men reported. While researching this tale, I came across an article in the English Historical Review that translated the original French slightly differently, claiming that William Jr. had eaten his mother's cheeks instead. My own review of the medieval text and every other translation I found supports that it was Matilda who ate her son, not the reverse. To double-check, I've included the original Old French passage for anyone fluent to confirm who ate whom. Even if we can't verify every detail, the tragedy of Matilda and her son's deaths was undeniable, and it shattered what little goodwill remained toward King John. The Oxford Dictionary of National Biography even notes that one of Matilda's daughters might have been imprisoned with them and released only in 1214. The scandal surrounding their treatment became a political disaster. Historian Sidney Painter called John's feud with the de Briouze family the greatest mistake John made during his reign, as it exposed his cruelty to all his nobles. Within just a few years, that cruelty forced him to sign the Magna Carta, a document that forever limited royal power and shaped English law for centuries. One clause still preserved today reads, "No freeman shall be taken or imprisoned or be disseised of his freehold or liberties or free customs, or be outlawed or exiled or any otherwise destroyed. Nor will we not pass upon him nor condemn him, but by lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. We will sell to no man. We will not deny or defer to any man either justice or right." Had this law existed 6 years earlier, John might never have been able to destroy the de Briouze family. Its inclusion was almost certainly a direct reaction to his crimes against Matilda and her son. Even the king seemed haunted by his actions. As he lay dying of dysentery on October 10, 1216, he granted permission to Matilda and William's daughter, Margaret de Lacy, to build a religious house at Aconbury, near Hereford, quote, "for the sake of the souls of her parents and brother." Perhaps it was his desperate attempt to seek forgiveness. But just 9 days later, John was dead. Many monks believed he went straight to hell, with Matthew Paris writing that, "Foul as it is, hell itself is made fouler by the presence of John." It's not hard to imagine the de Briouze family agreeing.